There is a place in the Middle East that most people have never seen. A place where the air is cool and damp, where mist rolls through valleys in the early morning, where mountain walls rise so steeply that the sky above you becomes a thin blue ribbon between the cliffs. It is a place that asks nothing of you, it only invites you to be still. This is the Musandam Peninsula, a small arm of land that reaches northward into the Arabian Gulf, belonging to the Sultanate of Oman, though separated from the rest of the country by the United Arab Emirates. It is remote, it is ancient, and it is one of the most quietly beautiful places on the surface of this earth. Most people, when they think of the Middle East, imagine flat, golden deserts. They picture endless dunes, bare horizons, and a relentless sun pressing down on everything below it. And some of the Middle East is exactly that. There is beauty in those deserts too, a different kind of beauty, vast and austere and humbling in its own way. But Musandam is something else entirely. Here, the Hajar Mountains fall directly into the sea. Limestone cliffs, shaped over millions of years, plunge into the deep blue waters of the Strait of Hormuz. The coastline breaks apart into hundreds of coves, inlets, and narrow waterways that cut between the mountains like rivers of the sea. The local people have a word for these inlets. They call them khors. And from above, from a drone, or from a high ridge, these khors look exactly like the fjords of Norway. Long, still, mirror-smooth channels of water between walls of ancient stone. That is why, for those who have discovered this place, it carries an almost impossible name, the Arabian Fjords. Let us begin slowly, the way this place deserves. Imagine arriving by boat just before sunrise. The engine hums low and quiet beneath you. The water is so calm it barely moves. It is a deep, dark blue at this hour, almost like ink, and the stars above are still visible, just beginning to fade at the edges where the sky is lightening. The mountains are shadows at first, dark masses rising on either side of the narrow channel. You cannot yet see their texture or detail. They are simply shapes, enormous, patient shapes that have stood here for millions of years. Then, slowly, the light comes. It does not arrive all at once. It seeps in from behind the eastern ridgeline. First, a pale silver, then a warm orange. Then the first true gold of morning touches the highest points of the cliff faces, and for a moment, the stone seems to glow from within, as if the mountains themselves have held the night's warmth and are releasing it back into the air. The water changes color too. It moves through gray and lavender, and then, quite suddenly, it becomes the most extraordinary shade of turquoise. Not the garish, artificial turquoise of photographs that have been over-edited. Something more natural and alive than that. A living color, deep and transparent at once. And the silence. It is the silence you notice most. There are no cars here, no roads along these shores. The only sounds are the soft lap of water against the hull of the boat, the occasional cry of a seabird circling overhead, and once in a while, the distant echo of a goat bell drifting down from somewhere impossibly high on the cliff face above. You look up, and still up. The cliffs rise 300, 400, sometimes 600 meters straight from the water. They are not smooth. They are layered and fractured and streaked with color. Bands of pale cream and warm ochre and deep russet run horizontally through the rock, the geological record of ancient seabeds laid down when all of this was underwater, long before humans ever walked this land. Here and there, a small twisted tree clings to a crack in the stone. Its roots have found some invisible path through the rock, reaching toward moisture no one else can see. It is a stubborn little thing, beautiful in its persistence. This is Khor Ash-Sham, the largest of Musandam's fjords. It stretches nearly 20 kilometers inland from the open sea. Even at its widest, it is only a few kilometers across, but its depth and its walls give it a quality of enclosed intimacy that is rare and precious. To float in its center is to feel both very small and very safe at the same time. The history of this place runs very deep. People have lived along these shores and on these cliffs for thousands of years. Long before there was an Oman, long before there were nations or borders or maps, there were people here. Fishermen, traders, navigators who knew these waters the way they knew their own hands. The Shihu tribe has inhabited Musandam for centuries. They are a proud and independent people, and their relationship with this landscape has shaped everything about how they live. They built their villages not on the flat ground beside the water, but high on the ridgelines above the khors, where they could see across the sea and watch for approaching ships. They kept goats rather than cattle, because goats could climb where nothing else could follow. They spoke a dialect so distinct from mainstream Arabic that linguists still study it with fascination today. To reach some of their older settlements, you must climb for hours along pathways cut directly into the cliff face. These paths are narrow, sometimes barely wide enough for one person. On one side, the mountain rises above you. On the other, the ground falls away into the blue water far below. The stone underfoot is worn smooth by generations of feet that passed this way, by women carrying water, by men leading goats, by children who grew up thinking nothing of walking these heights. There is one village, high above the Khor Ash Sham, called Khana, that can still only be reached on foot or by boat. There are no roads to it. The people who live there have chosen to remain in a place that the modern world has not quite found. They have electricity now, brought by cable along the mountainside, but their lives otherwise move at a pace that feels closer to something old and quiet. When you visit such a place, you are aware of a kind of continuity that is rare. These mountains look today more or less as they looked 500 years ago. The goats still ring their bells in the morning. The boats still tie up in the small harbors below. The sea still moves through the khors with the same slow breath it has always had. Let us drift a little further into the quieter arms of the fjords. Away from the main channel, smaller khors branch off like the fingers of a hand spread wide. These are narrower. In places, the walls on either side are close enough that you feel you could reach out and touch both at once. The water here is absolutely still. Not even a ripple, it is like floating on glass. Looking down through the water, you can see the bottom in some places. It is sandy and pale, and small fish move through the sunlit shafts that pierce the surface. Larger fish, silver and unhurried, move in slow circles deeper down. The coral in these sheltered coves is old and elaborate, built up over centuries into structures of intricate branching beauty. Occasionally, a sea turtle will surface quite close to the boat. It seems entirely unafraid. It lifts its ancient, rough-edged head from the water, breathes in a long, slow breath, regards you with one dark eye, and then slides back below the surface without a sound. You watch the water where it disappeared, and for a moment you feel something loosened in your chest. Some tight thing you did not even know was there. This is what wild places do. They remind the body of something the mind has forgotten. The mountains overhead cast long shadows across the water in the late morning. Where the shadow falls, the water is dark and mysterious. Where the sun still reaches, it blazes. The contrast between light and shadow is stark and beautiful, and it shifts slowly as the sun moves, so that the fjord is in constant, quiet transformation, even when nothing seems to be moving at all. The village of Khasab is the capital of Musandam, though capital feels like an overly grand word for a place so gentle. It sits at the edge of a wide bay where the mountains have stepped back slightly from the sea, leaving a small flat plain where the town has gathered itself around the old Portuguese fort that watches over the harbor. The fort is square and solid and painted white, and it reflects in the flat water of the bay when the tide is calm. It was built in the early 17th century, when Portuguese traders controlled the sea routes through the Strait of Hormuz and needed strongholds to protect their ships. The walls have stood through heat and time and the slow, patient work of wind and salt, and they stand still. The harbor in Khasab is a place of quiet industry. In the early mornings, the Dhow boats are being readied for the day. These are traditional wooden vessels, some of them quite large with high curved prows and painted hulls. They have been used in these waters for centuries, carrying goods across the strait to Iran, which is barely 35 kilometers away at the nearest point. You can see the mountains of Iran from the shore on a clear day. They look blue and distant and dreamlike, floating above the water. The Dhow trade that crosses this narrow strait is one of the oldest continuous trading relationships in this region. Even now, small boats loaded with goods make the crossing regularly, navigating by skill and memory as much as by instruments. The men who operate them are comfortable with the sea in the way that comes only from a lifetime of living beside it. In the mornings, the fish market near the harbor comes alive with color and noise. It is one of the few genuinely noisy places in Musandam. Fish of every kind are laid out on the stone floor. Kingfish, grouper, tuna, barracuda, and dozens of smaller varieties in silver and gold and pale rose. The fishermen call out to each other. The buyers examine and consider. Cats sit at a respectful distance, patient and hopeful. And then, quite quickly, it is over. The fish are carried away. The boats return to the water. The harbor becomes quiet again, and the fort sits in its whiteness, watching. Let us climb. Because to understand Musandam, you must leave the water eventually. You must go up into the mountains themselves, into the place where the land folds and bends and rises in ways that seem to defy expectation at every turn. The road that leaves Khasab heading south begins gently enough, following the edge of the bay. But very quickly it begins to climb, and it climbs steeply. Hairpin after hairpin, each one revealing a wider and more astonishing view behind you as you ascend. The bay below grows smaller. The fort becomes a small white square. The dhows in the harbor become toys. And then you round a final curve and suddenly the whole of the Strait of Hormuz is spread before you, impossibly wide and impossibly blue, with the mountains of Iran in the far distance and the oil tankers moving through the shipping lane like slow, dark beetles far below. The air up here is different, cooler and cleaner. In the early morning or after rain, it carries the smell of wet stone and some wild herb that grows in the cracks between rocks. You cannot quite identify the herb. You only know that it smells of altitude and solitude and something ancient that has no name. The landscape up on the ridges is spectacular in a different way than the fjords below. It is more open. The mountains here are bare limestone, pale and fractured, rising in tilted plains and jagged ridgelines that seem almost architectural in their arrangement. Geologists who study this region describe the Hajar Mountains as one of the most significant geological features on Earth, a place where ancient ocean floor has been thrust above sea level by tectonic forces, preserving a record of the planet's history that would otherwise be hidden deep below the surface of the sea. But you do not need to know any of that to feel the weight of this landscape. You only need to stand on one of these ridges in the early morning, with the wind moving quietly around you and the sky enormous above and the khors far below catching the first light, and you will feel it in your body. This is old ground, immeasurably old, and it has its own quiet authority. There are goats everywhere on these mountains. They are the Shihu tribe's goats, for the most part, though they wander so freely that it is sometimes hard to remember they belong to anyone. They pick their way along ridges where a single misstep would mean a fall of hundreds of meters, seemingly without concern. They balance on tiny ledges. They lower themselves down rock faces with a precision that seems physically impossible. And they watch you with their strange horizontal pupils and their calm, evaluating eyes. The bells around their necks are the music of these mountains. You hear them before you see the animals, a faint irregular tinkling drifting down from some invisible height. It is one of the most peaceful sounds in the world, that distant bell in the mountain stillness. Occasionally you will see a falcon. The Arabian Peninsula is famous for its falconry tradition, one of the most ancient forms of human partnership with a wild creature that still exists today. And the falcons of Musandam live and hunt in these cliffs with an effortless mastery that is extraordinary to witness. A peregrine seen from below is a dark crescent against the blue sky, hanging in a thermal, barely moving, and then it folds its wings and drops. The speed is almost too fast to follow. The angle of the dive is nearly vertical, and then, in some invisible instant far below, it is over. The falcon curves back up, something in its talons, and makes for the cliff face where its nest is hidden in a crack in the rock. You breathe out. You did not realize you had been holding your breath. The afternoons in Musandam tend toward a golden, dreamy quality. The light shifts from the sharp brilliance of midday into something softer and warmer. The shadows on the cliffs lengthen. The water in the khors takes on a deeper color, and the mountains in this light seem almost to soften at their edges, as if they are relaxing after the hard, bright work of the day. This is the hour to be back on the water. The traditional wooden fishing boats of Musandam are called shasha, and they are made in a style that has changed very little over the centuries. They are small and flat-bottomed, perfectly suited to the shallow coves and narrow inlets. The fishermen who take them out in the afternoon know the bottom of every khor by feel as much as by sight. They know where the groupers shelter in the shadow of an overhang. They know which cove holds sea bass in the evening. They know where the dolphins come at dusk. And the dolphins do come, usually in small groups, perhaps 6 or 8 at a time. They appear beside the boat without announcement, materializing from the blue water with a sense of arrival that always feels like a gift. They swim alongside for a while. Sometimes they bow ride, pressing close to the prow and riding the pressure wave, their gray backs glistening as they surface to breathe. They seem to enjoy the company, or at least they seem unbothered by it, which amounts to the same thing in a place this undisturbed. Watching dolphins from a slow-moving wooden boat in the middle of an Arabian fjord, with the cliffs reflected in the water around you and the sky turning amber overhead, is not something you will easily forget. It settles into the memory differently than photographs do. It settles into the body. You carry it home in a way that belongs to you alone. As evening approaches, something shifts in the atmosphere of the khors. The sounds change. The seabirds that have been calling and diving through the heat of the day grow quieter. The bats begin to come out, moving in erratic, quick arcs through the air above the water, feeding on the insects that gather near the surface at dusk. The first stars appear, very faint at first, in the strip of sky visible between the cliff tops. In the small villages along the water's edge, lights come on. Not many lights, just warm yellow glimmers in windows. The smell of wood smoke drifts across the water. Somewhere, someone is cooking. The smell of bread and spices carried on the evening air. And then, in the khors that are furthest from any village, a true and complete darkness arrives. There is no light pollution here, none at all. And the darkness that fills the fjord channels is the absolute darkness of places that have always been dark. Above you, the sky fills with stars in a way that people who have lived only near cities have never quite seen. The Milky Way is not merely a faint smear here, it is a river, a cascade, a solid band of light so dense and vast that it seems three-dimensional, as if you could reach up and move your hand through it. The reflection of these stars in the still black water below completes the illusion. You are surrounded by stars above and stars below. The cliff faces on either side are invisible in the darkness. There is nothing but water and sky and the quiet breathing of the sea. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most beautiful things a human being can see on this earth. There is a small island in Khor Ash Sham called Telegraph Island. Its name comes from the mid-19th century, when the British Empire laid a telegraph cable from Karachi in British India all the way to Basra, with a relay station on this tiny island in the middle of the Musandam Fjords. The men who staffed that relay station lived here, on this small scrap of land surrounded by water and cliffs, for months at a time. They were British civil servants and engineers, men accustomed to the gray, damp light of home, transferred suddenly to a place of extreme heat extreme remoteness, and extreme beauty. The isolation was difficult. The heat in summer was brutal. The letters they sent home, many of which are preserved in archives in London, describe a kind of madness that can come from being in a beautiful place with nothing to do and no way to leave. It is from these letters that the English idiom is believed to have originated: to be driven round the bend. Because the relay station was located around a bend in the fjord, out of sight of any other human settlement, and the men there felt that the remoteness was slowly turning their minds. The island today is uninhabited. The ruins of the relay station's buildings are still visible, small stone foundations and collapsed walls returning slowly to the rock beneath them. Fishermen sometimes tie up here briefly in the shade. Otherwise, it is quiet. It has been quiet for a very long time. But there is something about knowing that story that gives the place an additional weight. That men from another world entirely once sat here and watched these same cliffs and this same water. That they found it beautiful and impossible all at once. That they were changed by it, even as they struggled with it. The landscape has an uncanny quality for absorbing human stories without diminishing. Whatever has happened in a place like this, the mountains simply continue. The water continues. The stars come out each night in the same profusion. And the place endures. In the spring, if the rains have been kind, small flowers appear in the most unexpected places on the cliff faces. They find their way into cracks in the stone, these tiny, determined plants. Yellow flowers and white ones, and occasionally a bright pink bloom that seems almost reckless in its cheerfulness against the gray and beige of the rock. They will not last long. The dry heat of summer will come soon enough. But for a few weeks in March and April, these flowers are the proof of something stubborn and hopeful in the nature of living things. Wadi Sao, one of the seasonal river valleys that cuts down from the high interior toward the coast, holds water in its rocky channel during these weeks. It is not a raging river. It is a quiet thing. A slow, clear movement of water over smooth stones, finding the path of the least resistance toward the sea. The sound of it, in an otherwise silent valley, is extraordinarily sweet. Water over stone. One of the oldest sounds in the world. Birds gather near this water. Hoopoes with their ridiculous, glorious crests. Kingfishers that sit so still on their perches above the water that they could be painted there. Small warblers moving quickly through the low bushes. The hoopoe, in Islamic tradition, is a bird of considerable significance, appearing in the Holy Quran as a messenger between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. And there is something fitting about seeing it here, in this ancient place, going about its unhurried business with the air of something that knows it belongs. There is a viewpoint on the road above Khasab that the locals call the Eagle's Nest. It is not an official viewpoint. There is no sign pointing to it. You find it by taking a small dirt track off the main road and following it until the track ends, and there is only a flat outcrop of limestone with a low wall of stones stacked by someone, long ago, against the wind. From this place on a clear morning, you can see almost everything that defines Musandam. Below you and to the west, Khasab and its bay, the harbor, the White Fort. To the north, the main channel of the Strait of Hormuz, the shipping lanes, the hazy line of Iran on the horizon. To the east and south, the khors cutting inland between the mountains, their water catching the light. And behind you, the high interior, the ridgelines that fade into distance and eventually become the mainland of Oman, far away to the south. You sit here and the wind moves around you and the sky is very large. There is a temptation in a place like this to try to think important thoughts, to arrive at some conclusion about the nature of beauty or time or the smallness of human life. But Musandam does not demand that of you. It is content to simply be what it is. It does not explain itself. You stay for a while, longer than you planned. And when you finally stand and begin the walk back to the road, you feel, not lighter exactly, but cleaner. As if something unnecessary has been quietly removed without your noticing. The Strait of Hormuz, which Musandam guards on its western flank, is one of the most strategically significant waterways on Earth. Through this narrow passage, which at its tightest is only about 33 kilometers wide, passes roughly 20% of the world's traded oil. Every day, the supertankers move through in both directions, following the designated shipping lanes. They are enormous vessels. From the shore of Musandam, they look small, dwarfed by distance, but if you have ever stood close to one in port, you know that they are, in fact, among the largest moving objects ever made by human beings. They carry within them enough petroleum to power entire cities for days. And yet, from the Eagle's Nest viewpoint, they move with a slowness that seems almost meditative. They do not hurry. They cannot hurry. A vessel that large has its own momentum and its own time. You watch one moving through the blue, and it seems to take a very long time to cross the patch of water visible between two ridgelines. But it gets there, steadily, without drama. There is something about watching the ancient landscape of Musandam and the industrial vessels of the modern world simultaneously that arranges the mind in a useful way. It is not a sad contrast. It is simply a true one. The world is both of these things. The limestone cliffs that have been here since before mammals walked the earth, and the ships full of the fuel that powers the civilization those mammals built. Both moving at their own pace, both real. As the days pass in Musandam, a particular kind of peace begins to accumulate. It is not the peace of boredom. It is not the peace of having nothing to think about. It is more active than that. It is the peace that comes from being in the presence of things that are larger and older than your problems. The mountains receive you without judgment. The sea asks nothing of you. The stars appear each night whether you are watching or not. The people of Khasab are warm and welcoming in a way that is not performed. They have the quality of people who live far from the pressures that produce anxiety and performance. A fisherman, stopping to talk about the weather and the tide, will give you his full attention, without any sense of hurry. A shopkeeper will make you tea before completing any transaction, not because it is required, but because it is the right way to do things. Because hospitality is not a strategy here. It is simply how people are. You sit in the small coffee shop near the harbor and drink cardamom coffee from a small cup and watch the boats. The sun moves across the bay. The fort watches from its promontory. A pelican lands with improbable grace on the top of a mooring post and stands there with the patience of something that has all the time in the world. You think about the people who have passed through this strait: Arab traders and Portuguese navigators, Persian merchants and British telegraphers, modern oil workers on offshore platforms barely visible on the horizon. All of them have looked at these mountains. All of them have felt the smallness that these cliffs produce in the human chest. And all of them have passed on. And the mountains are still here. There is a final khor worth visiting before leaving Musandam. It is called Khor Najd, and it is often considered the most beautiful. It lies on the western coast of the peninsula, facing the Gulf of Oman rather than the Strait of Hormuz, and the approach to it by boat is through open water before you turn and enter the channel. The entrance is not obvious from a distance. The cliffs close together until they appear to be a single unbroken wall. But there is a gap, and through the gap the khor opens into a space of such concentrated beauty that experienced travelers, people who have seen fjords in Norway and Scotland and New Zealand, sometimes fall quiet when they see it for the first time. The walls here are particularly sheer and high. The water is a particular shade of deep emerald green, different from the turquoise of the main channel. Small sandy beaches nestle at the foot of the cliffs in places, perfectly shaped, unbothered by crowds, unmarked by anything human except perhaps the footprints of the last visitors, already half erased by the tide. Near the end of the khor, a narrow valley opens on one side, and you can step ashore and walk up into it. The ground is sandy, and the valley walls close over you quickly, and the sound of the sea fades behind you. Ahead, there is only rock and sky and the occasional thorny tree. Somewhere above, invisible, the bells of a goat. the smell of something warm and herbal in the dry air. You stand there for a moment between the mountains and the sea in a place that most of the world has not found. And you breathe. There are places on this earth that the traveler carries for the rest of their life, not as photographs, not as stories to tell at parties, but as something more intimate than that, a change in the interior, a room that was not there before. Musandam is one of those places. It does not announce itself. It does not compete for attention with more famous destinations. It does not try to be anything other than what it is. And what it is extraordinary. A world of stone and water and light and silence. A place where the Middle East, which so many have imagined as uniform and understood and already mapped in their minds, reveals a face that surprises the imagination completely. The Arabian Fjords break the stereotype not because they are trying to. They break it simply because they exist, because the earth is more varied than any image we carry of it, because behind every assumed geography there are mountains that nobody told you about, and waters that run between them in colors you have never seen, and people whose lives are woven into that landscape in ways that go back farther than memory. These mountains will be here long after every ship has passed through the Strait of Hormuz below them. They will be here long after the borders drawn across this region have been redrawn again, as borders always are. The limestone will continue its slow crumbling into the sea. The goats will continue to make their impossible way along the ridges. The dolphins will continue to appear from the blue water as if arriving with news. And perhaps that is the deepest gift a place like this offers. Not escape, not forgetfulness, not even rest, exactly, but perspective. The gentle, enormous perspective of standing in front of something that has been here since long before your troubles began, and will be here long after they are resolved. The reassurance of endurance. The peace of knowing that the world is still in places as wild and unhurried and quietly astonishing as it was at the very beginning. If you are ever given the chance to go to Musandam, go slowly. Move at the speed of the water in the khors. Move at the speed of the shadows crossing the cliff faces through the day. Move at the speed of the supertanker crossing the distant blue. Sit on the water at dawn. Climb to where the air smells of wild herbs and altitude. Watch the stars fill the sky between the mountains at night. And let the place be what it is. Let it ask nothing of you. And then, in that permission, in that rare and unhurried stillness, feel what comes. Something old, something true, something that has no name in any language but that the body recognizes immediately. The way it recognizes the smell of rain on dry stone, the way it recognizes the sound of water moving over rock in a silent valley. This is Musandam, the Arabian Fjords, the secret mountain paradise at the edge of the world's most traveled water. It is here. It has always been here, and it is waiting, quietly, for those who are ready to be still enough to see it.